Yeah.
So if you looked at all their kind of projects, say up until 2-3 years ago,
Yeah.
it was always like, we're keeping half and we're going to put the rest of it on the open market. And again, not selling like a service like myself, but going to a telecom provider, infrastructure provider like us and saying, hey, is this a route you guys are interested in? You can take some of the stuff that we have and then we sell our services on that system. But this is where AI has changed it. So what they're having is the arguments there is, they're looking at their demand profile and going, yeah, we only need half or 3/4 of this, with what we think. And then also their AI engineers are going, but if XYZ happens, we might need all of it.
Right.
And it gets back to that bet when you're talking about, these billions of dollars where that flows through and almost free capital. So to take a $200 million risk by keeping the rest of it.
For a bit of redundancy.
In case the AI boom really does go beyond what you thought, like that's something that they can afford.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast, your second one of the week, you lucky people. And before I meander off into my opening bollocks, I'll say that we're delighted to have a very special guest who is Jim from EXA. Welcome, Jim.
Great. Thanks for having me.
And I've got to say, we had a podcast with Cohere on Tuesday and he brought some rum and coke. Okay. And he was mixing us these rum and cokes that were like 50-50 in these glasses.
Okay.
So that got things off to a flyer. And then you've only gone and brought this, which says Balcones Brimstone, Texas Scrub Oak Smoked, made from roasted blue corn. So it's a whiskey, but it's made from corn. Whiskey isn't normally made from corn, is it?
Could be, yeah.
It's like barley or something, isn't it?
Well, it's not bourbon, is it?
Is it sour?
No, it's not bourbon.
Is it a rule that you have to be from Kentucky or something for it to be bourbon? Because
is it like an appellation?
Yes, very much so.
He's given it a whiff.
There we go.
It's rather strong.
It smells a bit like rum, like good rum.
Oh.
So, so you obviously have showing no mercy, despite we've had.
I didn't know you had a big week.
Despite the fact we've had a big week, so I think we'll mix it with beer. Obviously, if we just do this bottle, we're just going to be all over the place.
Yeah,
we don't want to.
No one needs to see that.
I'll just give us a little splash.
Yeah, brilliant.
Your hand's shaking, Scott. You've definitely been drinking too much.
Well, it's partly just steadying the bottle and trying not to spill it everywhere. And we got to say, we got our friend Ash from Babel in the background. Am I pouring you one, Ash? This was your idea, wasn't it?
Yeah, basically.
He's not going to get away with not having anything.
There we are. So that's very kind of you.
No,
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Brimstone, that's an ominous name. Yeah, and 53% alcohol. God damn.
It's from Texas. Everything's bigger in Texas.
They don't fuck around in
the alcohol
Texas.
Content.
Yeah, Ash, can you lean over?
I got that for him. There you go, Ash. Welcome.
So thanks for that, Jim.
Cheers.
And is Texas significant? Are you from Texas?
Not originally, but I've been there about the last 25 years with a 9-year break in Hong Kong.
Okay, yeah, sorry, you were about to say cheers.
Cheers.
Great to meet you, Jim.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Scott.
Cheers, Ash. Cheers, Pierre.
Cheers.
So, so obviously we'll get back to you in a sec, Jim.
Sure.
Yeah, I haven't tasted it yet.
Oh,
what are we saying here?
It's nice.
You can taste it strong.
Yeah, but it's nice.
Yeah, it's
good.
strong but smooth. That's dangerous. But we'll retreat to the more familiar embrace of beers at some stage, I'm sure.
That sounds good.
So yeah, we've had a long week. So we went out with Cohere. We obviously drank all that rum and coke on the pod. Then we went out with them after, for as long as their jet lag would permit.
Yeah. There came a point when they just looked like they were about to collapse.
Especially Ronnie. He was just like, "No, I'm done," which is fair enough because they'd flown over from the States that morning.
Oh yeah, that's
And
a long
West
day.
Coast as well. So.
Did you fly?
I got in Monday.
Okay, right.
So I've got a little time to adjust.
Right.
Maybe a Christmas party or two.
Right. yeah. So we did that, and then you reminded me actually when we were on the pod that there was BT drinks the next day, and basically, cut a long story short, I wimped out because I just thought shit because we've got loads of other stuff going on, but you still did it, and you stayed there till about midnight. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then last night we had a combination of various sort of work Christmas do's. And then we went for a meal after, and I got home about 2 a.m. last night, as did you.
Yeah.
Because you had some long ass bus ride, didn't you?
Yeah.
Where you were trying to stay awake.
It was a challenge.
And now here we are, lunchtime on Friday, drinking 53% Texan whiskey. So I think
people.
I think
we
Ian
have a
especially
problem.
deserves a round of applause. You might be able to tell if anyone's watching on video that it's not looking totally fresh.
No.
But I think you're doing well, mate. I'm proud of you.
Good.
So
well, my wife isn't. So
your wife
it's good that you are. Yeah, I was not popular this morning.
No.
Yeah.
No, well, there we are. Well, luckily for you, I'm going out with some of my other mates this evening, so
Yeah, well,
I won't entrap
gives
you
me
in
a
the
night
pub.
off.
Yeah. So that's what we've been up to, really. I mean, nothing particularly worky. We haven't been to like press events or anything like that.
No, the BT one was kind of worky.
Right,
It was a
okay.
bit of work
Was that good
chatter.
fun?
Yeah, well, I suppose we're going to talk about this at the end, but there was obviously quite a lot of talk
about
Vodafone
Vodafone 3,
'cause
yeah.
all the analysts who come out with their remarks on it were all there, and BT obviously has a view on it, which is that it shouldn't have happened.
Yeah. No, I think
various
BT are the least pleased about the whole
Yeah, I
thing.
mean, a lot of operators in markets, when there's consolidation going on, they're often supportive of it, but I think it was the remedies they didn't like. They thought there should have been more done to...
Yeah.
But we can talk about that.
Yeah,
We
but
don't
it's hard
get
to feel
that
too
now.
sorry for them, given that they were allowed to buy EU. But there we go. I know it's not the same, but still, it's still a big bit of M&A. Cool. All right. And then the only other bit of opening bollocks, I think Pierre was sharing some
Oh, yes.
Spotify
Oh yeah.
info with us. So
It's
this is how the pod is performing on Spotify.
It's our
Yeah?
2024 gains.
Gains.
I like that. So we're going to gain 29% more listeners, 39% more streams, and 45% more followers.
This year.
Yeah.
Cool.
Congrats.
That's a pretty good
Congrats,
figure.
gentlemen. That's
Decent
actually
jump.
a
Thank
nice
you.
jump.
It is. Well done, us.
Yeah.
And it's all thanks to awesome guests like you, Jim.
Thank you.
My laptop unlocks itself by trying to recognise my face, and half the time it gets confused.
You've changed since yesterday.
Yeah, exactly.
That tells you something about the drinking.
It does. It's just like you're a shadow of your former self.
You need to update your Face ID.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we'll just get straight into it then, Jim.
Sure.
So EXA, the full name of your company is EXA Infrastructure.
Correct.
So why don't you just take it from the top and tell us what you do?
Yeah, so EXA Infrastructure, we are a basically fiber provider. So basically, core fiber. We have 151,000 kilometers of network all throughout Europe. We operate on 5 subsea systems over to the U.S. With a network that goes up and down the east coast of the U.S. to actually connect data centers.
Right.
So, and then if you think of our European network, obviously all the way from Ireland, UK, and we've just done some recent extensions into Turkey, which actually, if you look at some of the geopolitical stuff that's going on with the Red Sea, there's now starting to be a lot of alternative routes that are looking to come up through Iraq and in Turkey to interconnect back into Europe. So it's back into the resilience.
Oh, the Red Sea, like the Houthis and
yes,
all
exactly.
that stuff. Right.
So it's
Blowfish.
yeah. So basically, it's
Interesting market to be in at the moment.
It is, and it's obviously in mostly data center to data center connectivity. So when you think about the growth of cloud, growth of AI, that's really kind of where we're positioned to take.
It's not a bad place to be right now with the booming to do with data centers and AI.
Yeah, it sounds like the market must be looking up in that.
It's definitely starting to look up. It's nowhere near the scale of the U.S. at the moment.
Right.
Because what you're seeing in the U.S. Due to easier regulations, availability of power, is a lot of your AI big training data centers go in the U.S. Right. That's where you see these 3 to 5 gigawatt facilities.
Yeah.
I mean, heck, I think you guys probably saw it a few weeks ago. I mean, Microsoft bought a nuclear power plant.
Yeah.
It almost melted down to go fund the data
Oh,
center.
did it almost melt down?
Oh, yeah, in 1979. I was a kid, grew up in New Jersey. I remember the family were going to run to Canada. It was actually, so it
I
was,
thought you meant it nearly melted down the other day.
No, it was way back when.
okay.
But the thing got closed, basically.
Oh, we see. So they're like rehabilitating.
Yeah,
this.
I think one reactor works and they're going to rehabilitate it. But it's
But this is the only way to do it, I guess, now, isn't it?
Well, I keep hearing about these people, these hyperscalers buying fucking nuclear power plants and
I
stuff.
think that's the only way you can do it.
No, I used to do data center stuff previous career, and in the 2005 to 8, something like that. You do data center site selection, and on your site selection, it used to be if you're 200 miles of a nuclear plant, a gas line, absolutely no go. Now it's can I get right next to it, and can I actually plug in?
Right.
It's just amazing the way it's just changed to be this kind of race for power.
Has it raised any concerns? Because there's obviously people who feel strongly about nuclear power.
I think it's just the start of it.
It's the start of it.
We'll see what comes, but I'm sure there will be.
I mean, it sounds like it's the sort of thing that's probably below the radar for most people. It's
the cleanest.
I know it is the cleanest, and I know there's a good argument for actually using nuclear power to do it, but there's all those nuclear concerns that maybe seem a bit outdated now. But someone at an event in Dublin about 3 weeks ago, actually it was Ronnie at Cohere. He was saying all these, data centers that are being built for large language model training. What you just said, they're basically being plugged into nuclear power plants because the energy consumption's so extreme now.
It's not very green, is it?
It doesn't seem to be. I mean, no. If you look at, and I think it has been Microsoft that came out recently that pushed back their carbon neutral target because of the AI stuff, right? So it's I
mean, isn't that what carbon neutral targets are for? to pick one, and then when it gets close, go, oh, actually,
we kind of missed it.
We'll stick another decade, and then just keep kicking the can down the road indefinitely. I mean, that's how it works, isn't it?
Well, hopefully not. Hopefully not for the fact that, but
or am I just being jaded and cynical?
But
a little of both.
Okay.
But like you say, the nuclear stuff's quite clean compared to.
Yeah. No, I'm all in favour.
So you can have high energy
blow
consumption, but you can still be clean, can't you?
Yeah.
You could be theoretically.
Yeah. But going back to your kind of earlier about the business side, right? So what you're seeing now is all these data centers going up. They're doing the training, and now we're finally starting to see the traffic, right? And for us being a connectivity provider, that's what we're looking for. But it's not on the same scale that you're seeing in the U.S. So there was a deal with one of the hyperscalers that Lumen in the U.S. released recently where they bought one of the hyperscalers bought 786 fiber pairs on a route. I mean, that is just like ungodly amounts of traffic and capacity. And in Europe, we're seeing a fraction of that.
And you're mainly your business interests are mainly in Europe,
mostly Europe. So I think if you look at, we bridged the.
But
US.
are you an American company?
No, we're actually UK based.
Oh, okay, so it's just a coincidence that you're American.
Yes.
So is that deal that Lumen's done? Is that quite a transformative deal for Lumen then in terms of revenues?
Well, there's a big debate on that. If you read it, it's actually it's billions of dollars.
Right.
But the question is, which hasn't come out yet, is like how much of that is new build and how much is that existing? Because a lot of that's going to be a new build. They're going to soak most of that up in capex.
Yeah.
So it's going to be quite interesting. I think that's going to be one of the things.
It's what their profits are out of it.
Yeah, and that's going to be one of the things I think really is going to be really interesting to see how this develops is, you're talking these mass amounts of investment, like who funds it?
Yeah.
Because this is like, and then how do you do it and how do you make money? And how do you get to the price points that people want? So I think that's going to be the thing that's really going to develop over the next couple of years.
Where's the traffic coming from? Because you've got all the processing going on within the data center itself to do with running the large language model. But then, you're using these fiber lines to connect up different data centers. Yeah. So what's the reason for the kind of
the big large learning models, right? They're pumping stuff now into other data centers, into inference models, and into edge stuff, right? So those all are in the U.S. right now, and that's why we're seeing a very big traffic uptick.
Yeah.
On our transatlantic business coming out into Europe. Okay. So they have that perspective. Then obviously it's getting distributed to the normal data centers around Europe, the kind of traditional ones like data center markets: Frankfurt, Amsterdam, London, Paris.
You told me that's flap.
I
never knew that. I like that.
Yeah. So
remind me to use it more often.
So that's where you were seeing most of the traffic go. And the other thing that you're seeing too, that sometimes the AI part's obscuring, is all of these businesses, cloud businesses, are still booming. Like the traditional cloud. So a lot of that demand uptick is also from that migration to the cloud is still going on.
Yeah.
So you're seeing a lot of that. And then I think in the kind of world we're living in, there's kind of two other things driving traffic patterns. It's resiliency and redundancy, just because on how do you make sure you have that. And then the other one is, like I said, that search for power. So what we're not seeing anymore is you really can't get data center space in any of those traditional markets that at enough power to do any of this.
Right. So
you're starting to see these advents of these new campuses in Portugal, in Spain. You're seeing stuff in Southern Europe. You're seeing stuff in Poland. Obviously, the Nordics are massive due to the kind of the hydroelectric power.
Yeah.
So you're seeing a lot of data centers be built there. So the question then is, how do you connect all these up? How do you get the inference centers, data centers set up? How do you actually feed it back? And I think no one really. I mean, people guess and have the thing like really knows exactly what AI is going to do.
Is that yours?
Yeah.
As far as traffic goes.
Sorry, Ian just nicked some of my beer. I thought it's important that our audience knows that. He's so fucking out of it, he doesn't even know whose beer it is. Do you want me to get one for you, mate?
Yes, please.
Sorry, you were saying.
One.
Yeah. But, do you fancy a Hazy Jane, which is like an American pale ale, or we've got some Peroni, which is like normal Italian
I'll
beer
take the Hazy.
Is the company itself like, how was it formed? Because I think you were talking before we came on that it's actually an assembly of a few.
Yeah, so if you look at it, it's basically an assembly of a few companies over the years. Like one of the original, if you look at the European footprint, was a company called Interroute.
Yep.
So that's the main footprint. Then the transatlantic came from, they bought a company probably 2015, 16 called Hibernia.
Right.
Which has the fastest cable across, which was now an EXA cable across the Atlantic for latency perspective. And then 2 other routes. So that was the kind of core of the Atlantic business.
Yeah.
That came out of that. And then that whole thing got bought by GTT.
Right.
Which then got carved out into EXA infrastructure.
Okay.
So we're owned by I Squared Capital.
Okay.
So infrastructure fund.
Private equity.
And the business is changing quite a bit at the moment because of AI. I mean, I guess the legacies obviously that you've been doing up to now is.
Well, the legacy's there, but the AI is changing for us is that, and again, this is the great thing about our network that I'm enjoying as I'm getting into this role is we based on the Interroute assets, we actually had quite a good presence in Eastern and Southern Europe. So
Right.
as we're seeing the chase for power go into these new markets, we actually have a network there that we can start building off of. So it's not as expensive for us to go build into some of these locations because we have POPs or hubs that are interconnected into there.
Yeah.
So that's really so it's almost, I see AI doing 2 things. One, it seems to be changing the topology of the internet. Like it used to be all around the big cities, getting IP traffic, and now it's all gone to these big massive data centers, feeding AI models, feeding cloud models, and now, and then back when we were saying about site selection stuff, one of the things the also used to be is like, I want to make sure I'm within, 5 miles of, 3 providers and come to my data center. Now you're literally having some of these hyperscalers go, I got a great deal on land and power here. And you're like, hey, that's like 800 kilometers away from like anything we're close to. And they're like, I don't care how much it's going to cost. Like fiber is almost like an afterthought now. Like
Right.
they have to have it,
Yeah.
but it's not the guiding decision. Where before it used to be, you got to get the data center close to the networks. Now it's almost reversed.
Okay.
And
Is that because you lose more power than actual?
It's not the power. It's just it's just certain areas you can get the availability of power. Right. So it's also just, it's obviously on the power itself, like it's available, but it's also the infrastructure, right? Do you actually have substations? Do you have a grid that can handle that? So they just go to find that.
And I'm guessing that one of the reasons that happens, other than all the logistical and sort of power related realities you were just describing, is that presumably the networking side of it is better, such that proximity isn't so important because you can get
Absolutely
bigger, fatter data pipes and all that sort of
exactly. And then I'm sure there will be applications that are there. The other thing that you were seeing is the AI applications are not as latency sensitive as some of the older applications, right? So this is where the resiliency and redundancy comes in. So you can go for a second or third route, go on a longer route to make sure you have backup, where sometimes in some of the older apps that wasn't possible because this latency wasn't going to work for the app. Right. So you're starting to see that as well. And I think, with AI, no one really knows what the traffic patterns are going to be. I mean, I can see it already. They're definitely going up. Whether the curve is this or this, I think will really kind of depend on what apps get built.
Yeah.
And how much of that inference model, and is it full edge, and like where does it go?
And how much is done on device as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do you have a view on that? Because that really is something that people are kind of wondering if it's going to do anything on the access network itself.
Exactly.
And require there to be investments in extra 5G or fiber to the home or whatever.
So again, I think what's interesting, what I've been kind of finding out as I've been talking to people doing some of the AI stuff, is definitely outside of my area of expertise, but learning is that I thought originally all these training models would dump into the inference and be done.
Yeah.
The inference model is not going to have enough to kind of like do the next level learning. So it's always going to have to kick stuff back to the kind of mothership data center.
Right.
To go back into the training model to refine it and kick back in.
Right.
So I think you're going to see a combination of both. Like you said, a lot on device 5G networks. There's going to be so much data going back and forth from those inference centers to the device, and might be even running on the device, as you were saying.
Yeah, well, I think it's worth reflecting. And you've modestly said you're not an expert on it, and I certainly aren't. But some of these terms that, for me, are relatively new to do with AI, such as inference, I think it's worth just quickly sort of jargon busting them.
Yes.
So the training, a lot of this stuff, a lot of reasons why NVIDIA shareholders are so happy is because training requires a hell of a lot of processing because you're basically getting tons and tons and tons of data and putting it into this model, and this model's sort of ingesting it, digesting it, and I don't know, I'm trying to make some sense out of it, or training itself.
It's pretty much all NVIDIA's GPUs at the moment.
It's training itself, and then the other reason why you're seeing this almost arms race is the more powerful the chips, the bigger the model, the faster and the quicker your model learns.
Yeah, and so
that's why you're seeing like this arms race. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it is, and we're going to get into so much of what you do has sort of geopolitical implications, and we're going to get into that in a bit as well. So anyway,
inference is the actual use of it.
Yeah, inference is the use of it. So like where you connect in to use it, and obviously it's getting fed from the training models, but it can't have the whole. You can't put like the entire model somewhere. Yeah, it's just too big. So you have these kind of edge sites on it. And
is inference quite processor intensive as well?
That one I'm not actually sure on.
Right.
But I think they're still putting all the NVIDIA chips and stuff in on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is the NVIDIA story about, which is positioned at telcos at the moment, about buy the GPUs and put them in your edge facilities, and you can use them for AI inferencing as well as hosting your radio access network. So you've got this notion called AI RAN at the moment that they're trying to sell, which has become quite a big topic in the industry. In fact, anything we write on that seems to get loads of traffic.
Cool. Again, I haven't dug too much into that, but in my little winding career, I do have some background in cloud and hosting, etc.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't see how that model works.
Right.
Because back in the old model, you'd buy this, your servers or whatever, and you'd run them for like 5 years.
Yeah.
And you'd get the kind of residual value of it. When NVIDIA is coming out with a new chip every 6 to 12 months that blows away the old chips, how do you actually keep customers interested, and how do you keep refreshing that at that point? Like, that to me is the one piece that kind of fascinates me, right? Like, how do you make money?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. Everybody's like scratching their heads and
everyone knows how NVIDIA makes money.
Yeah, that's pretty easy.
Yeah. But is it good for you for making money? Because you were saying about the Lumen deal in America, there's quite a lot of investment there as well.
I think we'll start to see that come over to Europe as the data centers come in, as the as they kind of test these models and they push it through. So it is going to be good for business. I mean that's the thing, right? None of this works without the pipes out of the data center. So
the pipes you've got at the moment, there's a lot of kind of investment just going into making those better and adding capacity.
We've done so in the last 3 years. We've actually put $300 million into our network of CapEx spend. So if you look at that in our space right now, not many people are doing that. Okay, and that's a combination of upgrading the existing routes with the newest fiber, with higher capability, with better technology. And then build outs. So, for instance, recently we've just completed a build out all through Turkey.
Right.
So we now go. So that is the Turkish market itself in cloud is growing quite a bit. I mean, it's a very big country. It's doing quite well. It's doing a lot. So, and then with with some of the stuff that's happened in the Middle East with resiliency, there's a lot of customers interested on another way out of Asia and the Middle East instead of going through the Red Sea. They go up through the Gulf and they come out that way and connect into Turkey.
Right.
So we've been in a position to be able to build those networks and create those partnerships. Yeah. That I think is going to like really position us well, kind of for this new kind of AI topology.
And what's the competitive landscape like? Sort of people in the same space as you in Europe.
Look, it's interesting. I mean, there's there's really only a few of us that I would call pan-European providers. It would be like ourselves, EU Networks, right? Colt. Yep. And Zayo Europe, for instance, right? Yep. So. There's a few others that really do pan-European. Yeah. So I think that's where the interest comes in, the opportunity for us. So one, that's competitive. We can, especially when you're in the traditional markets, and that's why we're kind of happy when we're kind of going outside some of the traditional markets. It's a little bit more of a green space. So there's that aspect of it. And then what you see when these data centers are going in is the local providers, right? So they actually probably have an easier access to the data center. But all these, companies that are spending these billions of dollars, they want, multinationals to spread stuff around the world. So it's a lot easier for them, instead of handing it off to somebody like myself or Colt at the border, to have us build it all the way out and kind of have, the old one throat to choke.
Yeah, of course.
Right. Yeah. So it's competitive without a doubt. But it's but we think we're positioned in a good spot. And again, a lot of that came from the legacy we're in. Yeah. A whole lot of that came from the $300 million of investment. And trying to follow the trends in the market.
So you're the owner of this private equity firm. Obviously, it's one of these like proper all-in patient capital type of.
Yes, they are.
Yeah. I like that term, patient capital, because sometimes you get the impression. Like I talk to people who I know who've had dealings with private equity or investor types, and sometimes you get the impression they can be a bit too impatient. They're looking for their return and their exit too quickly. Whereas investing, we've spoken quite a lot about just in UK fibre. If you're going to invest in UK fibre, that's a sort of multi-decade return, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you got these private equity companies who are prepared to sort of sequester hundreds of millions of dollars and just wait for that to sort of, I don't know, gestate. And it's good because that's the only way you get investment in big projects, isn't it? It's a bit of patience.
Yeah, it's patience, and then also though to because obviously those people are in it to make money, return on the investment.
Yeah.
So they're limited partners, etc. It's with that. It's the one thing. It's not the days of like the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Where you can go walk into one of these guys and be like, hey, I'm going to build it, and they will come.
Yes.
Like, you know what I mean? They have a deeper understanding of it as well. It forces us on the business side to really make sure we validate our business cases, to get anchor customers. So it's actually kind of forces a lot of discipline into it as well if it's done properly.
Yeah. What are the constraints on? Because you were saying that there's a lot of investment going on in the US by the hyperscalers into these AI data centers, let's call them, and it's not so much in Europe at the moment. But what are the kind of constraints on it not happening in Europe?
Well, like in US North America right now, it's also just power availability.
Right.
You can go into like somewhere like North Dakota or Wyoming and get a ton of power. You're in the middle of nowhere, so as far as regulatory stuff, etc. You're not like building a city or doing something.
Yeah.
So that's one big piece of it. And then I think the other one is there's there's still some concern around what will the regulatory market look like with AI in Europe in particular. Is it going to be
more resistance to it?
Yeah. Well, is there going to be like really strong data sovereignties where then you almost need a data center in every country, or is there going to be rules on what you can do? So I think everyone's I think everyone's sorting out the AI thing. But I think there's a little bit more there. And then, the kind of way I look at it, it's like if I place a big bet in the U.S. and everything gets really restrictive, well, at least I'm in the largest market in the world. Yeah. So my investment's not completely kind of thrown out the window.
So do you think Europe could do more? Because, we were talking about this before we started recording. There was that report by this very prominent sort of European politician called Mario Draghi a few months ago, sort of basically saying, look, to be honest, we're kind of fucking dropping the ball at the moment because we're putting, I'm massively paraphrasing, and I'll be lying if I said I read his whole report. But we're kind of putting too many obstacles in place, and we got places like the States, which is famously, I think over the decades, America's slightly got in its own way with some aspects of regulation, but it's still a relatively open business environment compared to Europe. And then you've got obviously East Asia, whether that's China or Japan, South Korea, or whatever. Although I think less said about South Korea at the moment, the better. It's all gone a bit mad over that.
Yes.
I'm not quite sure I got that, but the strange, it's very like a strange
declared martial law.
Yeah, no, it was you wake up, look at the news thing. It's like there's martial law in South Korea. It's like, really?
What's going on?
It's like, where did that happen?
Yeah.
But that aside,
he had a bad day and decided to do that because of
maybe he had a hangover or something. Oh, fuck it, martial law. But yes, but there is that concern. If we think of those as being the three major sort of economic hubs of the world, North America, Europe and East Asia, there is a lot of concern that Europe's sort of lagging behind. And I'm just wondering what you think about like that comparison. You touched on it a minute ago with concerns about the sort of regulatory environment. Do you have any more thoughts, seeing as you operate in Europe, about the pros and cons of operating in Europe?
I think it's one of the things with it is, for us, right? Especially when we're doing new builds, right?
Yeah.
It's new fiber. It's obviously we're digging, we're putting stuff in the ground. Yeah. In certain countries and stuff, the permitting process could just be brutal, right? That being said, that's become an issue even in the U.S., not so much for terrestrial, but subsea.
Right.
Just on getting permits, to kind of land cables and the environmental checks you have to go through and everything.
Right.
So all that stuff it slows you down. And that's, if you think about, again, talking about making money thing, deploying capital, one of your biggest drivers in a return profile is the time till you get money back.
Yeah.
So if that money's got to be hung up for an extra 2 to 3 years to build out, your business case is already kind of right. It changes the calculus quite quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're talking about the power availability, but is that just quite a big concern across a lot of Europe at the moment, that you can't, that it's quite expensive and it's a bit uncertain where it's coming from potentially? And
there's
a lot of geopolitics.
I think there is in that, right? Like I said, I'm not in that space on it, but it's when I started doing the subsea stuff about 10, 15 years ago, we used to, when we think about new cables or where to go or where to add capacity, it used to be follow the data centers.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so if Amazon's building a cloud region, okay, we got to figure out how we get at least something into that. Now it's like, you can forget the data centers, follow the power.
Yeah.
It's go find out where these big power blocks are.
Yeah.
And where these guys are going to put up these data centers.
Because if you can just plug into a nuclear power plant, as you were saying, like that, a lot of Europe, you can't do that.
Exactly.
Germany's very resistant to the whole idea, isn't it, at the moment?
Well, it doesn't help when the Yanks keep blowing up their gas pipelines as well.
Well, they basically don't have any power at all, it seems, in Germany. They just have to sort of burn wood nowadays, I think.
Yeah. But I mean, that, my facetious comment aside, that Nord Stream gas pipeline, whether or not, we don't know that the Americans blew it up, but one guy, Seymour Hersh, reported that they did, and I think that's the most plausible. I think when that classic thing of cui bono, who benefits.
Yeah.
I think geopolitically the Americans stood to benefit the most from that. But anyway, I don't know. But the fact that things like that happen just show how power in both senses of the word are now almost entirely overlapping. Geopolitical power is very heavily linked to actual sources of power generation and all that sort of thing. And obviously, Germans seem to have made a bad calculation of decommissioning a bunch of nuclear power stations, becoming reliant on Russia. Obviously, they didn't know this Ukraine thing was going to kick off. Right. But in hindsight, and hindsight's always 20/20, seems like a pretty reckless move by them, and I think they're suffering as a consequence. So it's interesting stuff.
Yeah, no, and you're seeing it all over. I mean, you talked about the Nord Stream. There's obviously in the last couple of weeks the big thing on the two cables being cut.
Yeah, we'll get into that more,
right? So
that's in your space.
It's kind of hitting all over on this stuff now. And then obviously, even with the, with all the export compliance stuff people are trying to put in on who can get NVIDIA chips, who can't. Like, it really is. It's so multifaceted right now. I mean, where it's being the layers.
Maybe before we do the cable stuff, just on the AI thing. Yeah. I mean, are you also involved in, because there's a lot of talk about the sort of intra-data center connectivity as well, connecting GPU clusters within data centers. Is that something that you do?
No, that's not us. That's not our space. We're kind of more of the data center out.
I mean, there's this big merger going on at the moment in the kind of supplier side of things with Nokia and Infinera. Yes, is that something that's quite relevant for you?
Very relevant.
What do you think of
that?
Very
relevant.
Right.
So for us, if you look at what we do, that kind of core infrastructure, so that base fiber, lighting of those big waves for the traffic.
Yeah.
In our space, there's really is, in different strengths, different things. There's kind of really two main vendors.
Yeah.
And that's Ciena and Infinera.
Right.
And again, both of their technologies are great. They have a little bit of like the old Intel days, AMD, where like one generation slightly jumps ahead of the next one. It's kind of leapfrog, but both of them are.
And say again, vendors of what?
Of basically
optical
equipment.
The PON stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So optical equipment. So then you look at it and you're wondering about, does that can change the competitive landscape? Does maybe Nokia take a view that they don't prioritize the stuff that Infinera brought over, which like we have a lot of Infinera in our network. We like them. We like their chipsets. So it creates uncertainty then when you're looking at these, hey, I got to get locked into another 3 to 5 years. What's it going to be? It's, so yeah, that's something that we're always looking at. So it does. And it's just, and I think that one's not so much where I think it's going to like tighten or make the pricing worse or anything. It's just more of, Infinera was very focused on what they did. They did it very well. Ciena's very focused on what they do. Do they lose that focus? Is there, that's the stuff that we look at, right? Because it's not just on the pricing, it's on the technology roadmap.
Yep.
What are you going to use? So it's, and even in that, then it gets to the complexities of it too. The stuff that, Infinera does some stuff that, is that kind of data center to data center stuff you're talking about. But then they also do the long haul stuff that we do. So they could maybe deprioritize one or the other. So it's again, something you really have to dig into. Yeah, no, it's interesting to see how it works, because obviously some of those mega mergers in the past, and it's not as big as the Nokia Alcatel, right?
The Nokia Alcatel Lucent one that happened, obviously, but there was a concern, I think, when that went through, wasn't there, that they kind of took their eye off the ball, I think, in mobile, and bringing those two portfolios together is one of the reasons for the problems they had.
Well, that's always the really appreciated, or it seems to be underappreciated aspect of mega M&A. You get all these CEOs who seem to want to make a legacy for themselves by doing mega M&A.
Yeah.
But it's nearly always incredibly disruptive and often catastrophic, like the AT&T Time Warner or something like that.
Yeah. But the other thing, I think the Nokia Infinera one's almost an endorsement of what you're talking about, because they want to go into that. They see this kind of this is where Pekka Lundmark, the CEO of Nokia, kind of sees the growth. It's not in mobile anymore; it's in into data center connectivity.
Yeah, and they're trying to get something new products where they don't have scale.
Yeah.
And create scale. So I mean that would be the
advantage. He basically said we need to compete against Huawei and Ciena, and we can do that by buying Infinera. We can have the kind of.
And if they throw a bunch of R&D into it and really even push it further, because it's like that could actually be a great win for the industry. Yeah. Right. So it'll depend on how it sorts.
And Huawei isn't as frozen out of fixed as it is mobile.
It's pretty frozen out of fixed.
It's pretty frozen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And it hasn't been as publicised as much as we talked about, but. I mean, the UK now has a ban on using Huawei in the fixed network as well, but I don't know, it's a bit of a later date, I think. But they're frozen.
Don't totally ban them, or they won't buy us champagne every year.
They just literally tried to phone me, actually. You'll know who, but I won't mention his name on the pod.
Yeah. You mentioned something earlier about like updating the technology, and I got to admit I admit to lots of areas of ignorance, and a lot of fixed line stuff is in that group. Okay. I know a little thing or two, and that's why I asked that question earlier, which might have been obvious to Ian, but wasn't to me, what those two companies mainly do. But I obviously understand that we have these successive generations of passive optical networking, and they're all called G or something these days.
Yep.
But then you also mentioned the fibre itself, so I'm just wondering if there's a couple of things. Is there a whole separate sort of area of the sort of PON technology that concerns what you do, as opposed to, I don't know, people who do fibre to the home or something like that? And I assume there is. And is the actual fibre technology, does that evolve? Because I always assumed like you lay down some fibre and you're sort of good for about 50 years. But
no, it does actually. I mean, again, it's some of the newer glass is better throughput. It actually will handle a bigger power load through it, right? Because you obviously got to repeat it. But and this is definitely something that my engineers tell me, because it's way above me. But supposedly, at least on subsea, with the fiber itself, you're starting to kind of approach what they call the Shannon limit.
Yes, I've heard that.
Which is basically kind of the limit of what you can actually pass through glass.
Right.
So then it would have to all come from improvements on the optical equipments on the end.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the bit that changes. It's the stuff on either side.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's why I was intrigued to know whether there ever is innovation in the glass itself.
Yeah.
But that's a really clever bit. I know either end.
Yeah, but to your point about the fiber stuff, right? It's like amazing. It's you look at some of the older systems in the Atlantic, the first ones that went in like 2000, 2001, etc. They were at the time certified for like 900 gigs of traffic total on like 6 fiber pairs. Right. Now those same fiber pairs, even on the old glass, are pushing 7 terabits each. Right. And that's just from upgrades on the inshore pieces.
20 years.
Yeah, I mean, so if you think about that scale, it's pretty cool actually.
Does the pricing work the same for you guys in that market as it does? Because the telcos that are sort of consumer facing that deal with us are obviously always grumbling about, there's this astronomical increase in usage, and we're kind of losing ARPU. It's going down all the time. But how different is it when you go into your kind of world?
Look, ours is competitive, right? And then you start getting into infrastructure type, so it's capex intensive, etc.
Yeah.
So it's any infrastructure business, as long as you're making a profit, it's better to have it actually with dollars on it than empty. It's kind of like the airline seat model, right?
Yeah.
So for us though, we don't get that pressure on like the ARPU side or that, but we get the pressure on, did someone else build another route that they want to go sell it and they want to push it.
Yeah.
And because prices compress. I mean, it depends on where you are in Europe or the US or subsea, but like it's about 10% price compression a year.
Right. So that's you have to charge 10% less for the same thing every year. Is that what that means? Right.
And what you've seen in our space in particular, which is why it is important, these new technologies. And these new technologies do get better. So if you look at a cost curve, and the kind of cost per bit, they are improving, but not at the same rate that the price declines are. But then where you kind of make it back up is, it's if that person was buying, I don't know, a terabit from you last year or 2 years ago, and they come back to recontract, they want a lower price, but now they need to. Mm-hmm. Right, because right, so that's kind of how you balance that game.
That's the opportunity. Yeah. Okay, yeah,
so
that makes sense.
Are then your biggest customers the hyperscalers?
They're one of our largest groups, and then obviously I just call the kind of cloud and content people. Besides that, kind of the push.
Netflix type.
Yep, and then also you look at it as again in our business, it's the one thing with telcos and carriers, like none of us are everywhere, so we use each other too, right? If we have to go get into a different market, if we have to go get IP traffic, so we buy off each other all the time.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you see
Frenemies.
Yes, basically, it really is.
Right, yeah, because I mean, do you see the the hyperscaler guys themselves getting into some of the stuff that you're doing in terms of putting the dark fiber in? And
well, they're building like crazy. If you look at it, if you look at subsea cables now,
yeah, I know a lot of that comes.
You cannot build a subsea cable unless it's kind of backed by a hyperscaler,
right?
And not just, I mean, I don't say never, but if you've seen the new models, and not just backed by a hyperscaler, like I'll take a fiber pair. It's a hyperscaler going, I want to do this project.
Yeah,
I'm going to keep 75% of it for me. Who wants to come in and take the other 25%?
Right. Because they've just got so much money.
They have so much money. They also have so much traffic. And for them, the other way they look at it, it's like, so I look at it as like a cost, and then I got like the broader market and the pricing and what I can get, right? If you look at them, that is a cost to them, but it's a cost that supports, billions and billions of dollars of revenue.
Yeah.
A day. So if you miss it by like 100 million, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
And because
I miss a subsea bill by 100 million, I'll never get my return of money back. I mean, it's like, it's
and because they got that money and those profits, they don't need to. There's a phrase that we have from sort of archaic English, which is spoil the ship for a pennyworth of tar, which basically.
It's the first time I've ever heard that.
Yeah, so I think it's back from when people used to make sailing boats, and you'd put tar on the outside of the boat.
Yep.
And a pennyworth is an abbreviation for a penny's worth.
Okay.
And so the axiom is that, don't scrimp on the tar or you'll fuck the whole ship up, and then you're sort of self-defeating. And the thing is, if you've got a lot of liquidity, you don't need to worry about that salami slicing and scrimping and saving and all that. You can just throw the requisite money at it because firstly, that you can afford it, and secondly, that it will pay off eventually.
Yeah.
So that's where these hyperscalers are in such an incredibly dominant position.
But are they sort of encroaching on the stuff you're doing a bit, or is the kind of opportunity big enough, you think, for everybody?
It's big enough for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Because even again, if you do the cloud story, right, and I haven't looked at the stats in a while, but there's still only like 20-25% of workloads in public cloud.
Yeah.
Right. So there's still plenty of other people running private clouds out of their own data centers, doing things.
Yeah.
So there's always like a tail on the traffic, right? Those guys are the major driver. They kind of create it. But there's always follow-on of different products and services from other people and how they're utilizing it. So you see that come through. And then again, the other thing is where they're using this for. It's like they're not doing it to kind of also like make money out of it, right? Like it's their cost perspective. So they're not really competitive as far as they're not like out there selling against me or trying to like sell to the same customers I am. And the other aspect of it too is that if you look at them and you both know from all your time in the industry doing it, it's like the last thing one of those guys ever wants is to have to go get a telecom license.
Yeah.
Right. So it's
well, and they've got to be careful about competing with their customers because they got their fingers in so many pies.
Yeah,
look at something like Amazon. Like we had a few weeks ago, we had a chap on from Ofcom, the regulator.
Yeah.
Well, of course,
Yes.
And he was talking about how they basically because Ofcom's got quite a lot of areas of interest now, including the bit I always moan about to do with censorship and that sort of thing. And he said Amazon's one where every single thing they do has some touch point with Amazon because it's involved in so many different areas. And they've got to be careful about, I think that's come up when we've been chatting, for example, like a major narrative from Digital Transformation World was always the fact that the hyperscalers are taking a bigger role in it. And they've got to be careful because they want these telco customers, but at the same time, they're in a position to compete with them if they're not careful.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Are the sort of ordinary telcos, the customer-facing telcos, like customers of yours as well? Would you do a lot of work for them? Or
yeah, absolutely.
In
not a lot, but yeah. So like if they're looking for for their IP backbone,
right,
stuff, we'll just sell the raw capacity.
So if
they run their network on top to go get traffic out of wherever they're getting it from.
Right. So you've got the hyperscaler group, you've got that kind of telco group, and then you've got like the enterprise guys.
We don't do that much in enterprise actually,
right?
Because again, we sell really the big pipes.
Yeah.
So it's kind of scale. So I mean, like if you look at our enterprise business, a lot of it might be some large financial institutions because they like having control of that layer.
Yeah.
So those types, and maybe some customers who are really kind of pushing a lot. But for the most part, I'd call it maybe just to wrap it up the service provider.
Right.
They're using that network to provide their service out versus kind of like traditional, enterprise corporate. I'm going to hook up a few buildings for you.
Yeah.
And manage your WAN and LAN.
Yeah.
It's a different market.
So the European market then really is, like a lot of it for you, depends on how it evolves in a regulatory sense, I guess, in terms of AI data centers.
Oh, yeah, that'll be a big swing. Without a doubt.
That's the kind of potential game changer in a way, because if it becomes a lot easier to do things in Europe in a way that the hyperscalers would like, then it could drive a huge amount of investment. Otherwise, we just get left behind in the AI race, I suppose.
Well, what I think you're starting to see though a little bit is, and gets back to this. I mean, I think it's fascinating. This is kind of like AI arms race right now.
Yeah.
It is an arms race.
Totally.
So what you're starting to see that with those guys, they are worried about the regulation, but they're each kind of let's say kind of increasing their bets.
Yeah.
And it's forcing the rest of them to increase their bets because there's that theory of like, hey, you know what?
It's competition, isn't it?
It was that theory of, oh, you know what? I don't want to get burned on competition stuff. But then also, if you look at your competitors pouring money into that market and you're going, what if I'm wrong on this? Then I lose Europe for 10 years. You know what I mean? So you're starting to see this.
But that's what's
like,
so worrying about that AI arms race from a safety point of view and a sort of Terminator Skynet point of view.
Yes.
Is because there's this urgency and this need to compete with each other, that's naturally going to incentivize recklessness, isn't it?
I would think so.
Yeah. I mean, if you're in a race, you're going to throw caution to the wind to win it. And that's where the regulation of it, even having had that chat with Ofcom, for all we know, Ofcom will end up regulating AI one of these days. But the regulation of AI is completely different from any other form of regulation, isn't it? When you get to ethics
people really
and all
know
that
how to regulate it.
Exactly.
Either. That's the problem.
Yeah.
The regulators are always a little bit behind a new technology anyway, and I think with AI that everybody's trying to get their head around what it means, and therefore you get this arms race, and you get some of the ethical concerns, and you'll get people like Elon Musk on one side saying we need to move fast to protect. He's a bit sort of contradictory, actually.
Yeah, he does. He does.
The most,
I agree with you on that.
the one who seems most bullish is Sam Altman to me.
Yes.
Well,
And then Elon Musk got some ego friction with Sam Altman because Elon Musk was involved at the start of OpenAI, wasn't he?
Bailed.
Yeah. And so you never know Elon Musk's so mercurial, you don't really know what his underlying motivation is. But some of his public rhetoric has been to tell Sam Altman to fucking calm down a little bit.
Yeah.
But I don't think Sam Altman's interested in that.
But then at the same time, he's now on his sort of government red tape cutting mission to not have anybody get in the way of stuff that he might want to do. So
I know. Well, that's a whole different kettle of fish, isn't it? It's obviously, this isn't a political podcast, so I won't go down this rabbit hole too much. But it is fascinating just watching some of these appointments that Trump's making before he's even in power yet properly, and how many of them are already very major figures in the private sector.
Yeah,
that sort of overlap between government and the private sector seems sort of stronger than ever with this new lot, which is fascinating.
I just think the conflicts of interest.
There's loads of
the
them.
charts. It's just
it is.
Take the politics out of it.
Yeah,
it's a worrying concern.
Yeah,
that people can tip the scales for their commercial ventures and that openly. Yeah, without the guardrails,
exactly.
Honestly, it's a concern.
I think it is. I think it is as well. And I'm kind of in favour. I'm as is a cliche on this pod, I'm a sort of libertarian, sort of small state, laissez-faire kind of guy. But even I can see that having someone who's got tons of massive business concerns, many of which rely on public money, as part of the government, but not even in an official form.
Exactly,
it's a bit weird. It's going to be seeing
what they call him. They call him a first buddy.
Really?
Yeah.
God, forgive me, Jim. What an American thing to say.
but I thought that with his whole involvement with Twitter was driven by that, and I know he had his purported reason for doing it is that he's a big champion of free speech and it needs saving.
Yeah.
But really, he just wanted to have a mouthpiece, and all you ever see if you go on Twitter actually is Elon Musk.
It's honestly, it's become.
It's just his big megaphone. That's what it is.
It's become unusable.
Yeah.
So they're going to be really like to sort of bring it back.
It's
they're
weird
going to be
with China because he has huge interest in China.
But that'll be very interesting. Talk about a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he does, but then so do loads of American companies. I mean, like Apple, for example.
Yeah, but then Trump
or
is
Disney
kind of going the other way.
Someone did some analysis on how much of his money comes from China, and it's
Elon Musk's.
Yeah, it's
a lot.
High. Yeah.
But so then does that mean Trump might not bang China as much as he expects? I don't know.
Might not bang China.
As in, like, attack them.
Steady.
I mean,
I knew what you meant. I was just being a dick. Sorry. Who knows? Who knows? I mean, this is the thing about it. Sorry, audience. We're doing politics again, but it is interesting, and obviously politics does affect everything.
Jim, do you want another drink?
I think I'm all right with the beer at the moment. Thank you.
Got the Hazy Jane. He took care of his whiskey like a man, though. Well played.
Yeah, we have.
What was I going to say? Yeah, I was listening to a podcast talking about Trump, and apparently, and I think Musk's a bit like this. He thrives on chaos, so he wants people around him all of whom disagree with each other. He wants everyone staying on their toes. He wants everyone so paranoid and so fractious that they don't form little
silos.
Yeah, and little power groups and all that sort of thing. And it's just a complete experiment. You know, like it could come off or it could be catastrophic. You get the feeling it won't be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. It's not very comforting.
It's not very comforting, no, especially not for an American. But, I mean, what happens in America affects everyone.
Yeah.
So yeah. I was just going to say before, I wanted to move on to other geopolitical stuff that does have a telecoms angle, I promise, audience. But you mentioned something earlier. I might be misquoting you, but you were talking about sort of growing into this position. How long have you been CEO of EXA?
Since the summer.
Right. So so I did hear you correctly. So what were you doing before that?
I was the CEO of a subsea company called Aquacoms that did cables in the Atlantic.
Well, that's a great segue for what I want to talk about in a sec.
Wonderful.
Okay. So how's it been? What's it been, like 6 months or something?
A little bit under 6 months. Yeah.
Right.
It's been good. I mean, look, it's the thing about it, it's got a really good team, and I mean, I knew that before I came in, right? Because again, as you all know, we live in this very small world. Like everybody knows everybody.
Yeah.
So reputation-wise, the team was quite good with it, and then like I said, when I was kind of looking and talking to about this opportunity, and they started showing me the network investments. I was like, hey, there's not many people doing this.
Right.
Yeah.
And for me personally, it's like if I'm not in a business that's growing, it's kind of unfun.
Yeah.
So it's like having the opportunity to get some growth, get some momentum with the company, kind of take some market.
You could have joined Intel.
It didn't work out so well.
That's one we haven't talked about at all.
No, well, maybe we'll get onto that. Yeah. I mean, it is fascinating. There's obviously a limited telco angle to it, but it is fascinating how this once dominant company is having such a tough time.
Although I have some sympathy for the view that Pat Gelsinger wasn't given enough time.
Well, I remember when he took that job, and I got a few chances of prior lives, got to meet him when he was at VMware and stuff like that, and really impressive individual.
Yeah,
I remember when he took the job, I was going, well, if he can't fix it, no one can.
Yeah.
And it looks like he couldn't fix it. So it's
But there's still a lot of people, I think, and a feeling within Intel that he just wasn't given enough time to sort of realise his vision. And it's like these turnarounds of these huge companies that invest this much money just doesn't happen in 2 or 3 years. It happens in a decade, maybe.
And from multiple sources of analysts who I respect, including Richard Windsor, who I often flag up on this pod, but also a chap called Charlie Demijan, who's been running a site called Semi-Accurate for a long time. And he's, I knew him back in...
Not sure about that name.
Well, it's a play on words, isn't it? Because he's writing about semiconductors.
I know it is, but then you're like, well, I'm only right half the time.
Yeah, well, quite. Well, it was obviously a calculated risk that Charlie made when he came up with it. I think it's quite a funny name. But I take your point. Funny, it does make it sound like you might be talking out your arse half the time. But both Richard and Charlie just were talking, and Charlie's been elbows deep in the chip world for us. I actually bumped into him once or twice in a previous incarnation as a journalist, and he's basically been a Intel, AMD, Nvidia guy forever.
Right.
And I think he's American, and he's probably got lots of inside sources and all that sort of thing. And then Richard Windsor is someone I really respect as an equity analyst who thankfully publishes something every day. And they're both saying it's cultural, it's not technological. They're basically saying that Intel just got fat and complacent and just so used to just being able to print money by dominating PCs and data centers.
Yeah.
And then turning that culture around, and they both agree with what you said, Ian, that turning that culture around doesn't happen overnight, and there seem to be signs that Pat Gelsinger was doing that.
Yeah.
And it sounds like the board just lost their nerve or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is a shame.
Well, they looked at the share price too much and not at the long-term vision.
And just after he's got like $8 billion off the American government as well. Yeah. Anyway, so
we're going to talk about cutting cables.
Yeah. Well, exactly. So you're past in subsea cables. So there's all sorts of interesting stuff. We touched on some of it already. You're talking about like the Red Sea and how that can be a bit dicey.
Yes.
And one way to describe it.
It's in the dicey file. One up from that is Moody. But then there's the Baltic, where about once a year at the moment, because when I was writing about it the other day, I noticed that the last time I wrote about it was a year ago.
Oh, was really?
And there was an incident, I think, a year before that. So it's become this annual thing where cables get cut in the Baltic, typically linking the sort of eastern Scandinavia with the Baltic countries and that sort of thing. And of course, especially ever since the Ukraine war, although even before that, obviously, Russia was always positioned as a sort of geopolitical antagonist. People assume the Russians are up to no good.
Somebody tripped over it.
But then this latest one that I wrote about, the finger got pointed at China because the only ship that I'm aware of that was seen at the site of this, and it was 2 cables cut, because that's one thing. In fact, you were telling us something earlier, and you might want to hark back to that. The assumption is that there's 2 cables cut. It can't be an accident, but sometimes it is.
Yes.
But there are 2 cables cut, and the only ship was this Chinese sort of cargo tanker type of thing.
But presumably they do that with the submarine. They wouldn't be like up for satellites to take a picture. No?
You'd be surprised. That so basically, again, and all of us that are operators, I don't know the acronym, but we basically, we have AIS systems, so we can see the ships that are actually over the cables. So part of that is just, and then we're in like usually territorial waters or something, right? It's different countries, etc. But like those are mapped for ship captains, right? Like where those are, because what you do have happen, and this is ever since the AIS system came out, and you could actually start kind of quote unquote going after ships and insurance, it got a lot better. Is you get these big tankers, right? And they're pulling into a port somewhere or waiting to sit outside. When they drop anchor, that thing just doesn't stop.
Yeah,
right. That thing
goes for a while.
digs in and drags for like a mile or 2
because there's so much inertia.
Yeah, and if they don't, and it digs into the seabed. So even if you have the cable buried,
so their anchors is just scraping along the bottom of the seabed
until it eventually stops it.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So it's just that's not them even keeping the power on. It's just them just shutting the engines down and So then you have these cable cuts from that. That's probably anchorage is one of your biggest ones. The other one is fishing.
Right.
From all those trawler nets.
Yep.
That's enough to really. Wow.
Think about those big kind of industrial trawlers, right? Like those ones that drop those really big nets that have all the weights literally to drag the bottom.
Yep.
It's those types. So
because then they're picking up shellfish and bottom feeders and all that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are actually usually.
I just guessed that, but
no, but that's kind of your usual things for cuts. So that's why we have these systems, so we can actually. And then you can use the system. You can even warn like the boat away. Say, hey, you're over a cable, and so.
Right.
And that's just so we can keep them up because they're not cheap to repair.
So you'd actually have somebody just sort of monitor them.
Yeah, in our knock, we have one of the screens is the AIS system.
Right.
So that does happen, and I think that's where on this one, right? It's like, from what I know, and I haven't because it's not any of my cables. I haven't looked at it that deeply on it, but. Suppose that thing was going back and forth over the cable for a while,
right?
And so
that's no longer a
plausible
accident.
But it's still you can look at it and go, that could be it, right? So it's not
an error, most likely.
I don't know why you would just drop anchor in the middle of the Baltics.
Oh, it's a forced error.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
And also, I mean, how sensitive things could be diplomatically, especially with China, who tend to throw their toys out the pram whenever you accuse them of anything. Remember when they started banning Aussie wine? Because the Aussies went, what the fuck's going with this virus? And they went, right, we're not buying any more wine. They can be quite sort of petulant. Yeah.
And to fix those, you just like fish them out and on the platform and then...
Yeah, literally, the boat goes out, you get both ends.
You can't just send the lads down.
You splice it and drop it back over.
Wow. Okay.
It's quite fascinating,
it's like
actually.
This diameter, more or less, no?
No, it's about this.
Oh, really? That's it?
It's as small as that. Wow.
Yeah. I thought it was
like a lot of stuff through a little bit of fiber, can't you?
How do we describe the diameter to like a mandarin diameter?
I'm guessing what's around it is as protective as possible.
Well, what you do is because protection is actually expensive for two-front, right? So you got to armor the cable.
Yeah.
So you usually only do that in the shallow water part. Okay. So the part that goes across the Atlantic that kind of free floats, you leave it unarmored.
So it's
because it costs so much money to go.
And that's very deep down. Obviously.
Like 3,000 meters type stuff.
Yeah.
So no anchors going down that far.
No, that's what I mean. You rarely see stuff out like in the middle of the Atlantic or the middle of the Pacific. It's always closer.
If you had something out there, then that would be a real problem.
It does happen.
Deal
It's
with.
pain.
It does happen.
It's not. I mean, but that's rare.
Yeah, you can't really bring that up.
And then a lot of times what that is like again, it's the whole thing is kind of fascinating. Is sometimes there's these faults where like there's undersea mountains. I mean, there's the landslide ones, but not even that.
Yeah.
Sometimes just over the years, if it's kind of up against like a rock and the currents keep rubbing it,
right?
It eventually just gets a fault where the signal can't go through.
Right.
Talking about
so
go ahead, mate.
The stuff at the bottom of the ocean is the diameter of a tennis ball.
Yeah, basically.
That's insane. I thought it was like
You thought it'd be a massive fat cable.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking like something like
I
that.
was,
No, no, no.
I'm impressed with like the tensile strength of these things as well, because, you know, as you say, there's currents and
Yeah.
then there's stuff going on, and yet they don't just spontaneously snap. They must be really strong.
Yeah, they are. They're quite.
How
Is
many
fibre itself
petabytes?
really strong?
They're in a casing. I don't know if the fiber itself. But,
Okay.
yeah.
How many petabytes go through one of those? Or?
So it depends. So usually, if you look at the standard, like a system across the Atlantic now, the standard, and there's been bigger ones, is usually the one that everyone's kind of building lately is a 16 fiber pair system. So it's got 16 fiber pairs. And then right now in the Atlantic, those can push 20 to 22 terabits per fiber.
Right.
And then that's the difference when you do like a terrestrial fiber, if you do it somewhere. A terrestrial, when you put it in, has 96 pairs. And that gets to, because you can repeat the terrestrial a lot easier than you can repeat the subsea.
Right.
So it's all about the
Oh,
energy.
you can't
pump
have
through.
the equipment underneath the ocean.
Well, we do. There are
Well,
repeaters, but you can't have tons of them because A, it's
Right.
expensive, and B, and they're
So
like.
there are repeaters down
Oh,
there
yeah.
as well. They must get damaged, presumably.
No, not
So
really.
They don't. Okay.
I mean, it happens, but they're actually warranted for 25 years.
No maintenance. For
Like,
25 years?
no, for 25 years, you're supposed to go down there and work.
Wow.
I mean, occasionally, like anything, you have something pop and you do a replacement.
Wow,
Fascinating.
It's,
That's just so crazy. Like the pressure that's down there.
Yeah. Well, I just think you basically, I'm sure it's more complicated than this, but you basically got a wire going from one place to another over thousands of kilometers,
Yeah.
and it doesn't snap. Just even the physics of that kind of impressed me.
Yeah, no, it's.
yeah.
Is there a bit of slack?
Well, there must be. There must be some kind of give.
Well,
built
there is a
into
bit
it.
of give, and that's when you think about it, when you think of those repairs.
Yeah.
The laying of it just involves a big trawler,
Yeah.
a big ship going out and
Yeah,
like, dragging
but,
it.
But it's the
behind.
same. It's the same. The repair ships are the same ones that lay it, and they have like
Right.
they go and they have like thrusters that keep them stabilized, and they have both ends of the cable up. Like the tension in that
Exactly.
is supposedly insane when they're splicing that.
Or to
Like,
bring it back?
yeah,
Wow.
So, like, back to that thing in the Baltic. So I guess the Baltic, parts of it aren't that deep for this
Yeah.
potential anchor damage.
yeah. No,
to happen.
something's gonna be a bit more shallow water.
Do you have any thoughts, and this might be putting you on the spot, and feel free to sort of
Okay.
swerve it, but do you have any thoughts on what the geopolitical motive is for dicking about with cables like that?
Look, I mean, obviously, if you look in anywhere, particularly the last 3 to 5 years, it's, it's not every country is kind of woken up and deems, the base telecom infrastructure, whether it's subsea or terrestrial, is critical infrastructure now,
Yeah.
right? So I think that's kind of become
So just like power supply and all that sort of
exactly
thing. Yeah, yeah.
right. So that's kind of fallen under that. And so I think this, I mean, again, not on the geopolitical side, but I think about it, it's like, to me, it's almost kind of like a test.
Right. They're
Right,
just showing
like-
that we can.
Like I can, and then if I do, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
You know what I
Oh.
mean? It almost seems like a game of chicken to me.
Well, this is a thing that
Like
Right,
when they fly close to stuff.
yeah, like when they chuck their
Yeah.
balloon over the States.
Yeah.
Well, they carry out military tests like in your
Yeah, yeah.
waters and this sort of thing, around Taiwan and
Exactly.
It's all it's sort of saber rattling, isn't it?
Yes.
It really winds me up. I had a bit of a rant about that on a pod not that long ago, where I wish all these people, and by these people I mean politicians and sort of security state types.
Yep.
I wish they'd all just fucking calm down and just let everyone get on with living their lives and making
it's
money.
when you go to the dojo at 12 years old and there's that kid who pulls off some routine in front of you, and just looks at you afterwards. It's
Right.
the same sort of thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Don't go near me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess that's why they're doing it, and it almost seems like a sort of once a year thing.
Can you go to the cable undersea and tap in?
I guess theoretically you can.
Right.
But
Be a good movie.
But what?
Spy movie.
But I mean, but that data that's going through is presumably in some kind of compressed or encrypted or whatever form.
So one thing about it, so again, the one that we provide on that, right, which is basically your wavelength, which is kind of, basically you really can't get access to that data unless you got something on the ends.
Yeah.
But even then, and then for us, we don't encrypt it. That's customer
Yeah.
choice to encrypt it, and most of them will do encryption on the data.
What's the business model for these subsea cables? Because they're kind of carrying continent's traffic, aren't they?
Yes.
So how does it
pays for
work in terms of? It's not a simple thing like we need a line put in here because we're putting some traffic down between this data center and another one.
Yeah.
I'm always curious how, because you got those big geopolitical projects back in the early days of telecom when they first laid the
Yeah.
first transatlantic cables, and it seemed like people like the Prime Minister were involved in it, making the first phone call. But how does it all kind of work today? Because there's so many parties that benefit from this stuff.
Yeah, I think it's still very private funded. I mean, right now, a lot of it's hyperscaler funded.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Yeah. So for instance,
so that thing you were saying earlier, where they get like half of the capacity.
Well, and then when you're saying about
and
then when you're saying about where they're building them, right? It's if you looked at the traditional transatlantic market, there was always a couple others, but like the main traffic corridor was Northeast U.S. in through Ireland, UK, maybe Denmark, maybe France. Like that was like where pretty much they all went.
Yeah.
And it was bit from obviously the population centers there, and then also it's a bit quicker latency wise the more you are. So then, 3-4 years ago, like all of a sudden the hyperscalers started building these massive cables from Virginia Beach, Myrtle Beach into Portugal and Spain.
Yeah.
And that's going purely because they're putting data centers there.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then, there's opportunities. And
is that because there's something different about the commercial or regulatory environment in Portugal and Spain that
I think
it's more benign?
It might be more on the data center side. Because there's been a couple big campuses that have been announced there. Like in the 2 to 3
but they must be doing
gigawatt
something right if people are choosing to make those data centers there rather than somewhere
and
else.
then so they're doing. So basically, if you look at now what's really kind of driving subsea build, it's the hyperscalers.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're doing it for them. Back to the thing we were talking about, like it's their commercial model. So they're going, hey, I need to connect this. I'm connecting it. And hey, Mr. Telecom guy like EXA, you know what? I have a couple extra fiber pairs. Would you want one for your own traffic?
Right.
That's kind of the model now.
Okay. But those investments that the hyperscalers are making, which they're obviously doing to connect their data centers, they're benefiting other people as well because they're carrying other traffic.
They absolutely are. They carry other traffic.
Yeah.
There's a few lately where they've been kind of keeping it all for themselves.
Right.
But
that's the danger, isn't it?
Yes.
They're so powerful and ubiquitous, these hyperscalers now. And I know that there's regulation and there's laws and all that sort of thing. But the worry always is, and we've had this loads of times in slightly different contexts, but when we were talking about telcos moving more of their operations into the public cloud, and we've always gone, okay, I can see what the benefits are, but you're kind of now putting yourself at the mercy of the company. And I know there'll be service level agreements and all that sort of thing, but you're kind of putting yourself at their mercy. Yeah. And that's always a slightly worrying thing. And we've got so much going on now. And these people are building their own fucking nuclear power stations. They're like sort of separate, sort of sovereign entities, these hyperscalers now, which, fair enough, they're there on merit, but it does get a bit worrying when you've got that much concentration.
I find it interesting that they have like some of the stuff they're putting in is for obviously just for their own benefit, and it wouldn't be used for something else. Because this argument, when you get into discussions about net neutrality and fair share, one of the things that often gets thrown back is, but they make all the subsea cable investments at the moment, and they actually provide a lot of the infrastructure, but it's no good if it's just but
that's a really recent development.
Yeah.
So if you looked at all their kind of projects, say up until 2-3 years ago, it was always like, we're keeping half and we're going to put the rest of it on the open market. And again, not selling like a service like myself, but going to a telecom provider, infrastructure provider like us, and saying, hey, is this a route you guys are interested in? You can take some of the stuff that we have, and then we sell our services on that system. But this is where AI's changed it. So what they're having is the arguments there is, they're looking at their demand profile and going, yeah, we only need half or 3/4 of this, with what we think. And then also their AI engineers are going, but if XYZ happens, we might need all of it.
Right.
And it gets back to that bet when you're talking about, these billions of dollars where that flows through in almost free capital. So to take a $200 million risk by keeping the rest of it.
For a bit of redundancy.
In case the AI boom really does go beyond what you thought, like that's something that they can afford.
Yeah.
So it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out in the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, totally.
What little I know about it, I'm sure you know a lot more, but if you look at like the inception of organizations like AWS, that was originally, I think, them just thinking, hold on, we've got some spare capacity. Yeah, how can we monetize it? And then it suddenly turns into a much bigger business than their core, their legacy e-tailing, which is fascinating.
Can I have another one of those?
What, you want more whiskey?
Yeah.
You savage.
Are they building data centers in Iceland, or is it not worth it being there?
There's some in Iceland, but more like Sweden, Finland, Norway right now are the big.
It's better to just cut across than hop in.
Yeah, so those are the big markets right now on it. But it is, the hyperscale
That's
thing.
a nice noise.
But Ian, to your point on it was, as you're saying with where does this come from? I think if you're looking in the future and you get back to the critical infrastructure, you get back to the geopolitical, you get back to one-on-one competitions in market, I struggle to see how you don't get to a model that has to be quasi-publicly funded.
Right.
Right? Because if a country really
It's
needs
accountability.
to get...
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not there now, but you kind of like play out the math.
Yeah.
And I struggle to see how you don't eventually end up in some form or fashion of that.
So maybe all the stuff we
So
were
that's
ringing,
another opportunity, potentially.
but then maybe like some of the stuff we were wringing our hands about Elon Musk having all these conflicts of interest being in government, maybe that's setting a precedent. And maybe we'll have more and more. We'll have Mark Zuckerberg in government and stuff because
Maybe it's always been like this, actually.
or maybe it has.
Is it different in Asia? Do the Chinese government and other Asian countries take a more active role in terms of funding things like
in
subsea
China,
projects?
in China they definitely do, right? Because it gets done from their telecoms.
It's not surprising.
So it's there, and
Yeah.
and if you do look at the subsea side, back to your Huawei thing, it's like from the pure infrastructure side, there really has become two separate networks.
Yeah.
Like Chinese cables can't, or any cable that has Chinese owned interest anymore can't get a license to land in the U.S.
Yeah.
Right, anything that's got Huawei equipment in it, or I can't think of what their name is, but the
ZTE.
Huawei Marine,
Right. Okay.
it's just so that you are getting kind of like two separate. But the interesting thing about that is if you look at IntelliGeography, did a really nice study on this about a year or so ago, that actually the number of IP connections and POPs in China and the U.S., like from U.S. companies in China and Chinese companies in the U.S., has actually been increasing. So the core infrastructure, it's being very segregated, but people are still buying the services that they need to get into the countries and the markets that they want. So it's actually kind of fascinating.
They're good at that telegeography.
They are. They're very good at that stuff,
Yeah, I
actually.
used to look at them a lot.
Yeah.
They're like they're the guys to go to for that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
I was just looking at the time, and if it's all right, unless you've got anything else you want to tell us about EXA, or Ian's got any other questions, I just might move it on to a couple of news items. One of which is directly adjacent to what we're talking about. So I've written, Ian, you've been so busy being on the lash this week, you haven't had time to write any stories, have you?
I've written loads of stories this week.
I'm just winding up. But what I'm really saying is I haven't had time to find out what you've written, so I'm going to refer to a couple of things I wrote. But I know you covered, not this one, but I certainly know you covered the final one we're going to talk about, which is this Vodafone 3 merger. But more immediately...
With every other man on the planet.
Yeah, well,
Or
yes.
in the UK.
But we've got a better take than everyone else.
Well,
Maybe. Well, actually, I pretty much just copied and pasted other people's opinions in my write-up. But I just thought, as we're talking about this this sort of US versus China stuff, there's been a really interesting development over it's actually taken months to play out, but it seems to have culminated in terms of the public messaging this week, which is a thing called Salt Typhoon. Have you heard of that?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. And so they were sort of, the American authorities were kind of drip feeding the information about it. And we were hearing that it was this, initially I was quite skeptical because they were going, there's this unprecedented attack where those horrid Chinese people have hacked our networks and all that sort of thing. And I thought, is this just the security agencies sort of creating a sense of urgency?
Yeah.
You know how they can do
absolutely.
that. But then I'm having to row back that opinion because we're getting more and more information coming out, and it seems quite clear now that there was this hack, and we still don't know the precise nature of the hack, but it seems to have penetrated pretty much every telecoms network in the States, and now it seems like it's affected lots of other countries as well, so it's quite a mega thing. And I think Salt Typhoon is the name of what's considered to be Chinese state-affiliated like hacking group or whatever. And it's just really interesting because...
So it was the content of phone calls and text messages in particular.
Yeah, because at first when I was reading it too, I was thinking like it was hyped up and all it really was. I mean, it still stinks, but like everyone's information these days is on the dark web. That was going to be like customer information and credit cards. I'd be like, okay, so it's like, but the fact they're actually getting text messages and phone call transcript, it's like, wow.
Yeah.
Well, there was
but they
a
don't have this data that's on your phone. Well, I guess text messages.
But I think it's mainly intercepting communications. And there was a hilarious bit where... I don't know if you remember, a little while back, some of I think the American authorities were trying to get the people who provide end-to-end encrypted messaging like WhatsApp and Signal, all that sort of thing, to provide them with some kind of backdoor. Yeah. And the pretext for them is so then they can find out what the baddies are saying to each other. But then people like Zuckerberg et al. Would go, you can't just create a backdoor. Yeah, Apple said no, and so did Zuckerberg, who owns WhatsApp. And now we've got those same security agencies going, everyone should use end-to-end encrypted messages to stop the Chinese spying on you. It's like, well, yes, we definitely don't want China to spy on us, but we don't want FBI to either. So that's a little side topic, but it's quite an interesting little irony that they're now lobbying in favour of end-to-end encrypted messaging. But that seems to be what happened. One of the things that happened, in fact, there was a letter sent by a couple of US senators having a go at the Department of Defense for not using encrypted messaging. So apparently one of the things that was accessed was non-classified DoD comms.
I can picture them. Have you tried rebooting the Wi-Fi?
Yeah, well, they're using Teams. I mean, this isn't a great PR win for Microsoft at all, because they actually explicitly flagged up Teams as a non-encrypted sort of vulnerable thing. So I can imagine there's a few people in Microsoft's comms having a bit of a
I wonder what CrowdStrike
panic.
has to say about this.
Yeah, well, indeed. But I think there's a couple of things that I think are really interesting. There's a telecoms angle, which is my story, the story I wrote today before I came out, which I was quite proud of myself for doing, given I was quite tired. As US finally details Chinese Salt Typhoon attack, FCC chair proposes new rules for telcos. So there's a little bit of, as you often get with a little crisis, there's a bit of shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted. But that's fine. I suppose better that you do that than you're completely complacent and you don't bother to do anything. Are you all right for a drink, by the way?
I'm good right now.
Okay.
No, thank you.
And we've got this FCC, and obviously the way it works in the States is so many public bodies are political appointees. So as soon as you have a change of political power, then you get a changing of the guard at all these. And the lady who's currently in charge of the FCC, which is the American comms regulator, is called Jessica Rosenworcel, if I've pronounced that right. Mm-hmm. And so she's on her way out. She seems to have done a decent job, as far as I can tell. But she's going, okay, seeing as what happened here, we're going to... So the last bit of my headline, which is proposes new rules for telcos, she's proposing that they have some kind of security certificate for all the telcos that's overseen by the FCC, and they basically got to get marked every year. They got to get judged. And then we're getting lots of stuff coming. I think earlier on in the week there was security agencies published what I call top tips, which are basically like a list of recommendations for telcos and their security. And the thing that struck me about it is, I mean, we all know, because it's a big part of our world. Ash, you might even have some clients in this space. I don't know. I can't remember. Sorry if I can't remember. That there's a fuck of a lot of telecom security vendors already. And there's a lot of money spent on security already. But the inference from this, firstly, the fact this hack happened probably isn't great PR for the telecom security industry, because how did that happen? But secondly, now that the government's poking its nose in, it seems to be saying you've got to raise your game. And it seems to create a completely new environment for telcos, because now they're going to have a lot more government scrutiny of their security operations. Now they're probably going to have to spend a lot more on it. As I mused at the bottom of my story, it's probably not a bad time to be, even though the PR is not great, it's probably not a bad time to be a network security vendor, because they're going to be compelled, and anything that happens in the States ends up happening to its allies, so it'll come over here as well. And to the best of my knowledge, we didn't even get hacked. But yeah, basically, that's the strong telecoms angle on this, is that they're all going to have to spend a lot more money, I think, on security to stop this sort of thing happening.
Yeah, I guess this is one of the downsides of being so dependent on telecoms services these days, isn't it? You know, you go back to the 80s and the 90s, and it was like an analog world of, you know, Excel spreadsheet seemed really innovative, hosted on your local server, and now everything's so interconnected, and hacking just seems to be quite a routine thing almost. And actually, my wife got someone trying to break into a Google account and Facebook account. You know, you get a flagged up message saying someone's trying to access, and it was on two. It was quite worrying then. He's like, well, change your address somewhere, change your password immediately. But then the other weird thing that happened to me a few months ago was a notice from the school that my son goes to saying the school's been hacked. They're closed for a day. And like a lot of records have been accessed. And then we got a follow-up message a few weeks later saying Alex is, unfortunately, one of the students, his records were hacked, and some of his details are now on the dark web, including his health records and other stuff. And there's nothing you can do about it. And it's like, well, I don't know what they do with that, to be honest with you, but it still makes you feel a bit
Well, I mean, there's a whole
weird,
dark world of data broking, isn't there?
Yeah.
And as you say, it sort of defies the imagination to imagine what people do with it. But there's obviously some value there.
I mean, I get phone calls like saying, "Hey, I'm your service provider, and we're giving you a 20% discount." And I'm like, "Okay."
Yeah.
And then they ask for your email, and I go, "No, you must have that." And then they hang up. They got my phone number from the dark web.
But I just feel it's going to get worse because it's one of those things that however much you spend on, and you've got to obviously spend on the security products and the encryption and do what you can, but it's a kind of insurance job where something's always going to go wrong to somebody, and these things are going to get more regular, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, this big state-back thing is like on another level, obviously, but
and it comes back to my sort of question that I'm used to Jim before, is like, what's in it for them? I mean, what's in it for them is just to fuck with each other as much as anything else, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's
it's like cutting cables in the sea.
Well, you look at like in the States, they call them the three-letter agencies, and there's so many of them. I mean, that's one thing. Like briefly getting back into the politics that I am quite looking forward to with this next lot is cutting down on a bit of that state bloat.
Yep.
Because God, there's so much overlap. There was one announcement this week where they had 3 different three-letter agencies coming up with a joint statement. Well, that seems like a triplication of effort by itself. But yeah, I mean, and I was musing about why they do it. But I was just wondering, Jim, also, and again, this might be something that you prefer to swerve, and I certainly don't expect you to name any individuals, but like, you know, from the circles you go in, have you heard people chatting about this? Have you got a sense of the magnitude and the significance of this hack?
I haven't got any details on it actually with it. I mean, I've just kind of seen a little bit what's been publicly released.
Right.
But I mean, it's something. Look, I mean, we worry about our security posture every day. I mean, because we know it's what we do. You know, like you said, anyone's targeted these days. But you know, so it is. It's top of mind for what we do on it. But it's and that's your thing. I think it's like, you know, it's like they have that saying. It's like the only people who don't worry about security or think they haven't been hacked are the ones who have been hacked.
Yeah,
like it's like or whatever it is. Like, you know, it's like
when it can be catastrophic. Was it CrowdStrike? Were they the ones that had that nightmare?
Right? Yeah. So you're having that supply chain stuff. You know, the other one, which is fascinating, not in a good way, is you're getting to the point where, you know, like you literally can do AI now.
Yeah.
Where it's like you can, you know, impersonate someone's voice and video. Yeah. So if you're doing like
deep fakes and all that.
Yeah, so even if you're doing the Zoom call to like verify banking information, it could be completely like it's just so it's just moving so fast. It's so hard to.
God, this is bizarre. Sorry, complete coincidence. I have my laptop open while we're talking, and I've got a shitty attention span. So
is this a message on Teams saying we need to access your computers to do some maintenance?
No, I got one of them. I flagged that up as phishing. No, I just seen another one. I'm not expecting you to comment on it, but it's just bizarrely something's come in. Normally on a Friday afternoon, you don't get many press releases come in. But I just got a press release saying, in Telecoms Industry Association EXA welcomes the Council's conclusions on the white paper, How to Master Europe's Digital Infrastructure Needs. Seems to overlap with your day job a bit.
Yeah.
I'll flag that
my
up
afternoon reading. Thank you.
No, I'll tell you what, I'll forward it to Ash now.
Thank you.
There you are. Look at that, live from the pod. Anyway, but what were we just saying? Yeah, so that was the telecoms angle, and then the broader one. I think it's just really interesting. Obviously, that's the only reason I asked you whether you had any, whether you had actually sort of spoken to people in the industry and what their reaction was. It looks like certainly the American security states is quite worried about this.
Yeah,
they think it's a really big deal. They sort of drip fed it, and I've realised
that's the thing. So it's been drip fed. So that's why it's not.
Yeah. But I've realised why they've drip fed it is because they're still getting their head around it.
Yeah.
I don't think they know necessarily the attack vector. They don't even know necessarily whether.
I don't even know how you get them out.
Well, quite. They don't seem to reckon that they've purged them yet.
Yeah.
And the scope of it. So not only does it seem to cover pretty much all of US telecoms, but it seems to be the whole US sphere of influence. I haven't heard anything about the UK, which makes me feel a bit affronted. Like the Chinese can't be bothered to hack us.
Well, we're a third world now.
But this seems like a really big deal, and I guess it's just I don't have much more to say on it myself. It's just that watch this space because it's obviously an evolving thing.
Yeah.
But it seems like a really big deal. And I guess the thing that slightly saddens me about it is it emboldens the China hawks. You know, all the people that want to basically completely isolate China. And, you know, I'm not saying that China doesn't get up to no good. I'm sure it does. Yeah. But then so do we. What bothers me isn't any necessary special affection for China or whatever. Although, of course, we know people at companies like Huawei and ZTE and get on perfectly well with them. It's just the more the world is split in two, the more impoverishing it is for everyone, because there's just less business going on, and then there's problems of like incompatible technological standards and all that sort of thing. So that's what really saddens me about it. Every time, if all this is true, and obviously China's denying it, but as I said in my piece, I quite often, when something's going on with China, I go onto a website called Global Times, which is Chinese, but I think everyone accepts, state sponsored, state controlled. I don't think there is a free press in China at all, but I'm happy to be corrected.
No, that's what happens in one-party states.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And so the reason I go to Global Times is I consider Global Times to be a proxy for Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party. And the interesting thing is, normally what they'll do is you'll get some editorial just saying how full of shit everyone is and how dare they accuse us of innocent old us of doing this stuff. And there's very little of that on the Global Times right now, which, you can read into it what you want. But to me, I think it implies that they sort of like, I think we've just been caught in the act.
Yep.
Whether or not they intended to be caught in the act. 'Cause, I mean, a hack of this scale, it was going to get
at some point you're going to get
revealed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. If no one's got any other thoughts on that, I'll go on to our sort of final little news segment, which is something that's very UK-centric. And we've spoken about it a few times before on the pod, but this week the merger between Vodafone UK and 3UK was finally approved by our competitions body. And I think the interesting thing about it, and we both wrote about it, didn't we? You wrote about it too, Ian? Mm-hmm. Caught you with a mouthful of beer there.
Multiple times.
Yeah, we've definitely covered it. But I think it's worth...
Covered it to death, I think.
I think it's... Yeah, I agree.
I never want to write about it again.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. For fuck's sake. But I think it's worth... I suppose there's two things that I want to talk about is the remedies, i.e. what they had to offer up in order to get the thing over the line. And then also just what the new... assuming now that it happens, I think there's some rumour that Sky might try and appeal it or something like that. Mm-hmm. I think they've got the arsehole about it from an MVNO point of view.
They have.
But assuming it goes through, what that'll look like. So to start with, I've been banging on for a little while, so I'm going to pass the ball to you, Ian. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what your coverage was in terms of the remedies and what your analysis of that is?
Yeah, I mean they've got so it's the third and the fourth biggest network operators in the UK. Mobile network operators. This has been going on for a year and a half. I think the review's taken. I think it was mid-2023 when Vodafone and 3 announced the deal. And it's a combination of their assets. I think Vodafone will have a 51% stake in the merged company. And it's pretty controversial because I think Europe's had this position for a long time, and we were obviously part of the EU for a while until we left it. That 4 networks is good and 3 networks is bad. You need this kind of sort of almost dogmatic view that you need to have sort of 4 mobile networks to protect the consumer.
Yeah.
Which is very sort of pro-consumer, but is not liked by the telcos, especially in such a kind of fragmented European market anyway, where there's a lot of small countries and there's a lot of inefficiencies, they would argue. And I've got some sympathy with that, I really have. I think having multiple core networks for every other country, and it's you can see why they complain when they compare themselves to the US or China. You've got these huge markets where there's sort of 3 big telcos active there, and that was the main case that Vodafone and 3 made. They basically said it's like we're not covering our returns. They had some data from Ofcom backing it up, almost showing that the weighted average cost of capital is ahead of ROCE, and there seemed to be some support and sympathy for that on the government, on the authorities' side. And they've eventually got the deal over the line. So it's a pretty game-changing deal because it's the UK going down from 4 mobile operators to 3 mobile operators.
It's setting an interesting precedent. Obviously, it already happened in the States, but in Europe, it's. I don't think it's setting a.
I'm not sure it's. I don't really buy into the analyst's view that it's setting a precedent for European. Okay. Well, because we're not part of the EU anymore. I know,
but people are still aware of what we've done.
They are, but I'm not totally convinced that people in Europe will look at this and say, well, that's necessarily. They might. I think what might happen is people look at what happens now for the next 2 or 3 years.
That's more what I meant.
And I personally think some of this could be a bit of a car crash. You know,
Really? Well, tell us.
yeah.
How?
Yeah, no,
Well, because I, for a start, I don't think a lot of these mega mergers between operators that have happened have necessarily, like, there's a couple that have already happened in the UK and they're not quite the same because it's not bringing two mobile networks together. But BT-EE, the way that deal was positioned was that it would be a massively transformative thing for BT-EE back in 2016. BT share price is down 70% since then. I mean, it's not totally to do with, you know, it's not, there's a lot of other things that are going on, but the fact is that if the EE deal was such a good thing for them, then you would expect them to be doing better than that. The Virgin Media O2 takeover that happened more recently, I think 2022 it went through. Liberty Global, one of the parent companies of the kind of merged company, is down 40% I think since then. It's
the Virgin side.
You'll get, there's so many MVNOs in the market now, and Neil McRae made this point, who used to be at BT, that what will happen is prices will still continue to be forced down. They'll probably go up a little bit. I mean, the companies themselves, by the way, are arguing prices won't increase, which I think is a slightly strange. I mean, they obviously want to say that because they want to counter the regulatory concern about the impact on consumers. But I also think it's a bit of a strange thing to be saying, because everybody in the industry thinks prices should be a lot higher in Europe, really. You know, their ARPU's twice as high at least in the US as it is in
something like that.
Yeah. So I almost think it's a slightly bizarre argument that ARPU will continue to come down. You know,
and it's already a shit level.
You've still got a lot of MVNOs, and then you've got this clash of cultures with Vodafone and Three, where I know for a fact, and I can't say how I know, but I know there's totally different views on the way that you build and design networks. There's totally different views about things like Open RAN within those two organisations. There's about 6 different vendors in the mix, I think. I mean, you've got Three using Nokia, Samsung. I think Three in the UK must have more radio access network vendors than any other country operator in Europe and maybe the world of a comparable size. It's got Ericsson, Samsung, Huawei, Nokia, and a bit of Mavenir in the UK network. And in cities like Glasgow, all of them are active there.
Wow.
It's like, normally carve things up geographically.
Exactly.
They've got this kind of salt and pepper thing going on in Glasgow. And you think if they've got that in Glasgow, they've probably got that in other cities as well. You've got Vodafone with this sort of shift that they've done to Ericsson in the last few years, but they've got this Huawei estate that they're trying to move to Open RAN using Samsung and some other companies. You've got 2 different core networks. You've got 2 network sharing deals that was the big concern of BT, that the new look company Vodafone 3 would have, because 3 and BT had this network sharing agreement called MBNL, and Vodafone was in a different one with VMO2 called Cornerstone. The merged company basically has a role in both of these network sharing deals. And they couldn't untangle it. This is my theory on why they never saw this as a problem, because they couldn't figure out a way out of that network sharing issue, which is clearly a competitive concern. You've got one company in both network sharing agreements. How is that not a competitive concern? It has to be a competitive concern. And you go back to Adam Smith, that's a competitive concern.
And on top of that, there was a thing that I only realised when I was writing this up yesterday or the day before, whenever it was, December the 5th, yesterday, was that there was a little concession that Vodafone and Three made this summer about flogging some spectrum to VMO2.
But nobody knows how much spectrum they're selling.
But that would just add to BTE's feeling of feeling frozen out and shortchanged and all this.
BT's publicly communicated issues with it are partly to do with the MBNL Cornerstone issue, because they feel, so the 2 companies coming together will have 36,000 sites, but they don't want to maintain, which is twice as many as BT has and twice as many as VMO2 has, but they don't want to maintain 36,000 sites. They want to take 10,000 out of service and go down to a 26,000 site network. The problem is the 10,000 they want to decommission are probably going to be in the MBNL footprint, where they share costs with BT. And they've got contractual obligations. So you can't just go, well, we're not interested. There has to be, they make shared payments for site maintenance, for rental. There has to be some kind of, they're also selling, there's a complex deal that's taking place where a load of Three sites are actually moving to Cellnex because they've sold sites to Cellnex, which makes it even more awkward for them, I think, because Cellnex will have done that deal expecting 3 to be an anchor tenant for a long time, presumably. So
Indeed.
So somebody else maybe could come in. Somebody else maybe could come in and replace 3. But I know BT's one of its concerns is that we don't know who that company might be, and it's an unknown party. So you've obviously got concerns about who you're in an arrangement with. Then you go down to this 26,000 site deployment. You've still got the hassle of trying to rationalise your suppliers across that, and what's going to happen there, where you've got a culture clash, I think, potentially between the 2 different technology groups. This is just the network side of it, by the way. There's all sorts of concerns about branding.
Well, the cultural side. I mean, we were talking about BTEE. I won't name him, and it probably doesn't matter. But we both know someone who was on the comm side of EE when that acquisition happened.
Yeah.
And I remember chatting to him and just thinking, just the cultural difference, because EE had that sort of more mobile, funky, fast-moving sort of vibe about it, and BT was this sort of stodgy former state monopoly.
Yeah.
And so, you get these guys. I mean, you as a CEO, I'm not saying that it necessarily applies where you are now, but I'm sure you've had experience where you've had to bring together people from different cultures or different. It's not simply done, is it?
No, it's not. I think we were talking just overall about mergers and acquisitions. It's the thing is you just got to be careful with it, right? Because it is so easy to make an M&A deal.
Yeah.
Look great in Excel.
Exactly.
Implementing that is like, it's and again, the stuff that I've done previously, it's different than mobile, but you do all these ideas of like, we'll combine our pops and we'll save this much money. And then what you don't realize is when that comes up on the project plan 6 months later after the merger, that somebody that was like in procurement just re-signed like a 10-year deal with that data center company.
Right.
And you're like, okay, that's out the window. So it's like the complexities of it is
and then the pure like cultural and psychological side I find interesting.
Yeah.
You're dealing with human beings. Yeah. And while it must be tempting to be very top down and just be like, all right, I'm the CEO, everyone just fucking get together and get on. It doesn't work out that way.
Do you have a plan on how I can do that? That would be brilliant. If you got something, that would be wonderful.
One thing I noticed in all the analyst commentary on it, which I thought was my broad assessment of all the analyst commentary on it, is that I thought it was overly positive.
I think it was definitely
overly positive. There were very few people drawing attention to the things that could go wrong, and more people sort of saying this is what the sector needs. Now, by the way, I'm not against consolidation. I actually think there's a good argument for them going down to 3 networks, and maybe it will be better in terms of returns on investment as well. But you would still think that some analysts would sort of draw attention to things that could go wrong. And one of the things that nobody mentioned, by the way, which isn't a thing that could go wrong, but I still think it should be mentioned when there's M&A, is that there'll be a huge amount of job losses in the telecom sector in this country as a result of this deal over the next few months, in a sector that's already lost, by the way, loads of staff, where BT is going down from 130,000 people to 70,000 over the next decade. Those are the figures that Alison Kirby's stuck with, that Philip Jansen first put up because of the impact of AI, and basically not having to build that fibre anymore because they're going to finish that job. Right. This is a sector that's going to be absolutely decimated jobs-wise by this deal. Nobody even referred to that in any of the analysts.
My only thought about that, I think you're right, and you've always been excellent on tracking these headcount things. But my only pushback on that is I don't think by itself, and I'm not saying you're suggesting.
I'm not saying the CMA should have looked at that.
I don't think by itself, that's reason enough. But yes, it's worth noting.
It's a shrinking sector in terms of the people that are employed in it, and I just found it interesting that no analyst drew attention to that. And I think the other things that on the spectrum side, I think, which is one of the other things that BT is concerned about, there's this huge. Everybody said 3.5 gigahertz spectrum is the sweet spot for 5G. This has always been the assumption. Ericsson and Nokia, that's where they've put their efforts to design equipment. 3 clearly has a massive amount of 3.5 gigahertz spectrum. It's a huge imbalance between them and every other telco. Okay. And we don't know what they've said to nobody has been able to analyse that and say, is this a fair deal where it will lead to some rebalancing of mid-band spectrum, because they've not said how much they're prepared to sell. So the CMA's basically said, well, we'll trust them to do a deal that rebalances spectrum to a satisfactory extent without giving you, any sort of insight into what's actually happening there. I find it slightly strange because that was a massive concern, the spectrum imbalance, and the only things that make a difference to coverage and speed of service is basically how many sites you've got and how much spectrum you're putting into service at those sites, which, by the way, is the remedy.
I was going to come on to remedies in a sec, but I kind of agree with what I think you're inferring by what you just said, that they were allowed to do this quite contentious bit of M&A with relatively little. They didn't have to offer that much in terms of remedies. In fact, I was just reviewing what I wrote after I detailed the remedies, which I'll get onto in a sec. I said, this is me reading myself back, while both companies moaned about the remedies when they were first proposed, they must be secretly relieved to have had to commit so little.
Well, they got such an easy deal on structural remedies. There's
no structural remedies, really.
There's no structural remedies apart from them offering to sell some spectrum to VMO2, which we don't know what that is. The network sharing joint ventures, they basically looked at it and gave up on, I think, because it was too hard to untangle. What would you possibly do about that? And the other one that was a slight concern, I think, was the site imbalance. You know, that even after decommissioning 10,000 sites, they've got 26,000. BT's got 19,000. I think VMO2's got 18 to 19,000. There's the latest paper, the remedies paper. They're actually quite happy for them to have up to 30,000 sites.
Oh right, I didn't.
If they wanted to, they probably wouldn't want to maintain 30,000 sites because it's going to be too expensive. But that was the figure. That was the upper band of what the CMA is prepared to accept.
On the remedies, there are actually only 3 remedies that were highlighted in the CMA press release, and I'm sure when you get into the full document, you can dig deeper into that. But I just thought I'd flag them up, and I'm going to do them not in the order they delivered, because I think 2 of them are relatively trivial. One, and this is reading CMA's own words in their press release. So one was, you didn't mute your phone. Who's that?
Not me.
It's me.
You didn't mute your phone.
I know, bad me.
How do you not recognize your own weird?
Because I've got a new phone, and also it's on Do Not Disturb, and yet it rang anyway.
Bad
right.
phone.
No, I've got a new phone, and I haven't switched it to Voodoo Child. Normally my ringtone's Voodoo Child by Jimi Hendrix, like the opening riffs. But so that's just on the default bullshit ringtone that you heard there. That's why I didn't
I think
recognise
you
it.
need to go back to the Jimi Hendrix.
I think I fucking do.
Definitely need to get back
It's
to
not
Jimi
2005.
Hendrix.
As a priority.
That was a
You
little,
definitely
that
have
was
to
a
get
little
back
bit
to
weird.
Jimi Hendrix.
And at least
it
it'll
was.
stop me shooting accusing glances at my podcasting colleagues when it's actually me that did it. So yeah, before I said rudely interrupted.
You're about to read out the remedies.
Yeah, so they're reading out the remedies from the CMA in their own words. So one is capping selected mobile tariffs and data plans for 3 years, and then they just go on to say why that's a good idea. So there's certain tariffs, I think the cheaper ones, because they needed to be reassured that skink people would still be able to get a mobile phone.
Yeah.
So that's
I don't think that's as onerous as it initially appeared.
No, I don't think it's a big deal. I mean, they've just got to cap certain lower level plans, but they can get around that. And people who want
it's a bit Vladimir Lenin, but
a bit top down.
Yeah.
Is that what you meant by Vladimir Lenin?
Yeah. The other one's even more Vladimir Lenin, though.
Okay, so the other one here is offering preset prices and contract terms for wholesale services, brackets again for 3 years, to ensure that virtual network providers can obtain competitive terms and conditions as the network plan is rolled out. So that was in response to concerns that they've got such a big piece of the action
which in plain English is monitoring wholesale prices.
Right, which is, as you say, is very top down.
Yeah.
Very price control-y, commie stuff. We don't necessarily approve of that. But those are the relatively trivial one. And then the big one, at least in terms of the presumed sort of economic implications, is I'm just going to read it out, or at least until I get bored, because it's a bit longer. Delivery of the joint network plan, which sets out the network upgrade, integration and improvements Vodafone and Three will make to their combined network across the UK over 8 years. I think I'll leave that there. But I think they committed about 11 billion, was it, over 8 years?
So they've said they'll spend 11 billion. They totally misled everybody in their press release and said we'll spend 11 billion over 10 years on the rollout of a standalone 5G network. And then there was a little number one, look at the footnote thing. You go down to the footnote. This is combined capex for the two companies over 10 years. So it's nothing to do with 5G. It's partly to do with 5G, but
maintenance capex in there. You got everything.
You spend on a lot of stuff that's not to do with 5G, obviously in capex. So, and then you go, well, hang on a minute. Let's look at what the Vodafone and Three are actually spending on capex in previous years. What does that mean? Yeah. In 2022, they spent 1.5 billion, so it's a 400 million pound reduction. Okay, and then so their justification would be, well, it's better to spend 1.1 billion a year, I guess, on a combined network than it is to spend 1.5 billion on two networks. But the network's a lot bigger. It's 26,000 sites. It's not 18,000 sites. If you work it out on a per site basis, it's actually pretty much the same.
So is what you're saying that the pledge isn't that different to what they would have spent anyway?
The pledge isn't very different to what they'd have spent anyway. Right. And they've also got a huge job to do in terms of decommissioning sites, figuring out this Cellnex MBNL issue, cultural clashes that always gobble up some capex, all those other things that could go wrong, two core networks that need combining. So you've got a lot of money that's just going to go on sorting stuff out, and not this vision of giving the UK the best standalone 5G network there is. Yeah, I could just see a scope for a lot to kind of go wrong in that. And then the other problem is, so I was kind of quite negative about the way they're going to monitor this, because and I think we had James Crawshaw, an analyst colleague of ours, saying it's a bit weird to monitor capex rather than the output. You know, what you really want to do is look at what companies are achieving.
Good point.
You want the output, not the input, because they could just go off and spend all their money on a load of GPUs if you're looking at capex.
Yeah, exactly.
So, in fairness to the CMA, they've not proposed to do that. What they've said they'll do, if you look at the really long document, is they'll monitor the number of sites where. So those two things, how many sites you're using and how much spectrum is in use at each site. They'll every couple of years, maybe even every year. It's a little bit unclear at the moment. They'll monitor how much spectrum the combined companies put into use at these sites. And if you're doing that, then it's actually probably a better way of doing it than looking at what your coverage is or what your speeds are, because speeds can be affected by loads of people coming into an area for a concert venue, for a concert thing anyway. So I think that's actually quite sensible. The trouble then is they are then held to spend a certain amount each year. And they've got some price controls in place. And if the economics don't work out, normally you go, well, we'll cut some capex because it's not a good market. Yeah. There's not an appetite for 5G. These guys have got to carry on spending, otherwise they'd break their investment pledge.
So that's an interesting thing to put to you, Jim, as a CEO and someone who has that sort of overall view of the economics of a business. Yeah. I think that Ian makes a really good point about having these constraints coming from a couple of different directions. You know, it seems possible that they might be too constrained to be able to make the normal adjustments that a CEO might choose to make depending on the business environment and that sort of thing.
Look, I think, from, again, mobile's not my kind of core, but, you look at it, and from my understanding, talking to multiple operators around the world on it, it's like there is a viewpoint, maybe it's self-serving, that 3 competitors versus 4 does make a difference.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Right, so I think there's, if you look at that and a bit of the ambiguity and that you were bringing up, I'm wondering if there's a confidence level of like, hey, you know what? This ballpark is about what we got to spend to make money and do it. Yeah. And we can fit this stuff in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you have stuff go pear-shaped or the market changes or whatever, then what do you do? I think that's the point you're getting to.
When you've got these constraints.
Yeah, because what you've done is you've kind of cut off all your optionality.
Yeah. Totally. What they should have done, really, is allow it to go ahead without the behavioural remedies. If they weren't prepared to do anything structurally and just go ahead with it. Yeah. But the problem then is everybody, like the competitors, would then have gone, well, you're not even doing behavioural remedies either. Yeah. You're not going to take any spectrum away from them. You're not going to sort out the MBNL cornerstone issue, and you're not going to do anything about site numbers. It almost feels like they've gone, we feel we need to do behavioural remedies, but they're not a very sensible solution.
They feel like a bit
They feel a bit Stalinist is what they feel like.
No, but also performative. Like, I'm with you on Stalin. It's interesting you've moved from Lenin to Stalin.
I was about to say, yeah.
I would have gone...
Yeah, Lenin seemed a bit tame.
I would have gone dark. I would have gone from Lenin from the start, if I'm honest. But at the same time as being very central control, top-down... sort of thing, which is what I think you're alluding to with these commie dictators you keep referencing. it also, some of it seems quite superficial, and like, what's the minimum we got to do so that it looks like we're attaching conditions, but actually, as Ian says, we might as well have just gone, go on then. Yeah. And they could have done it a year ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's that question too, though, right? When you look at all these regulations and everything there, like, I get that you're there protecting the consumer, you go through it, but this gets back to your people angle that you were talking about as well. Like, you create that uncertainty for people for a year and a half.
Yeah,
that stagnates both businesses.
Yeah,
right. Because people come into work and they're like, as much as we all love to lay out company missions and goals and everything.
Yeah,
everybody comes in and goes, "What's in it for me?"
Well, also,
and if you throw out that whole bit, right? So it's
how do you plan beyond the next quarter or whatever?
The year and a half review, by the way, I find really interesting because you could have come out with a conclusion. I mean, they've obviously got some very smart people to build some fancy Excel models and do all sorts of work on this. And really, you could probably got a few people together in a room for a few weeks to come up with the same conclusion. There's a guy at Imperial College London, and this shows how opinions are always going to diverge about this stuff. All the analysts, they all wore nice bow ties last night. I thought it was very sort of symbolic of what analysts do. Is that they all they're all
taking a piss out of me because my big effort. Because for our Christmas party, they said dress to impress.
Okay. There's a thing called analyst consensus, isn't there?
Yeah.
That's basically what analysts do.
So they were all wearing
wants to be on the fringes.
I want to go and hang out with the pack, And
they were looking at me. I was just wearing a plain black T-shirt instead of a metal T-shirt, and they were like, "Is that your big concession, Scott?"
There's an academic at Imperial College London, which is a good college, by the way. Imperial College London. It's one of the really good universities. There's a professor there who covers telecom, and I'd noticed. I think I'm connected with them on LinkedIn.
Yep.
You forget who you are connected to, but I did notice his comment on it, and he said the whole sort of behavioural remedies thing was like, I mean, he kind of broad. He didn't say Stalinist, but he was like alluding to that. This is just ridiculous to have this kind of
Trotsky or something.
To have this sort of system, because it's obviously going to lead to a distortion in the market, and having price controls and having something like that is going to lead to some kind of market distortion. One can't be enforced anyway. What are they going to do? They're not going to say demerge.
Yeah.
It's like that thing with T-Mobile. T-Mobile said it'll create new jobs and will not reduce our workforce, and then they've cut 10,000 people since then. But they're not going to say, well, you can't merge with Sprint anymore.
If you
demerge.
If you think about it, like you said, the lost jobs in that space, right? With the BT example you gave. Yeah, I think it also just shows. I mean, telecoms is a hard business right now.
It's really bad,
money, right? They're not doing it because they want to just cut people.
Yeah,
this is like to actually get bottom line, get return.
It is. Yeah,
free up capex so you can stay competitive. It's like it's a lot of trade offs.
Yeah,
Scott, how did Dennis O'Brien put it?
Telecoms is bollocks.
No,
something like that. It's shite. I think he said bollocks as well.
It's not that bad.
No, we had. Are you familiar with Dennis O'Brien?
Yes.
Yeah, and so we had him on the pod about a year ago, and he said, and he was
comparing it to the good old days.
Okay, and he was fascinating, but he expressed himself in a very sort of amusingly Irish way.
Yes,
using
which he's known for.
He is known for that beyond there. No, he definitely didn't hold back, and it was really cool. And it's shite and it's bollocks. So that was funny. Well, look, on that obscene note, we might just wrap it up there. We're on the hour.
Yep.
Jim, thanks a lot for coming over.
No, thanks.
I know you didn't fly over just for
fun.
us.
Oh no, I did actually. That
was good fun. Thanks for whiskey. That was very nice.
Yeah, it's really good.
Extra impressed that Ian went back in for another. In fact, I'm going to take a photo of it so that I can tell my mates, because I'm meeting my mates later, and whenever I meet them after the pod, I'm always obviously well ahead in terms of being pissed compared to them. So I can at least now identify why that is.
The culprit.
But I think I did all right. I did one sip of that and I did 2 beers. So I think I'm pacing myself. I think I'm growing as a person.
Yeah.
I certainly am physically, sadly. Cool. Okay, well we'll wrap it up there. Thanks again, Jim.
No,
Great to meet you. And if you've got a moment, we'd be delighted if you join us for a pint after.
I'd love that.
Cool. All right. We're only just going to do the one. I think we've got 2 more pods left in the year. And they're both going to be Thursday ones. So yeah, we got 2 more in the year. But we won't get 2 a week. This is an exceptional week. Maybe that'll happen more next week because we're so fucking popular, because we're growing 45% or whatever it was on Spotify. Anyway, I'll shut up now and I'll just say thanks a lot for listening and make sure you join us for the next one.